Hello, and welcome to today's program. While many U.S. presidents' names are frequently discussed in history books, my name, Millard Fillmore, often fades into the background. Today, I'll be taking you on a journey through my life, from my humble beginnings to the pivotal moments that led me to become the 13th President of the United States. I was born in a poor farming family in upstate New York, and unlike many of my contemporaries, I didn't grow up with privilege. My father was a hard-working man who instilled in me the values of perseverance and dedication, which would become the foundation of my life. Although formal education was not readily available to me, my thirst for knowledge led me to self-study, and eventually, I became a lawyer. My early career was unremarkable, but I believed in the idea that opportunity favors those who are prepared. My path into politics wasn't smooth, and before becoming president, I served as a member of the New York State Legislature and as Vice President of the United States. It was a time of great unrest in our country. The issue of slavery had divided the nation, and tensions between the North and South were reaching a boiling point. I understood the gravity of the situation and the stakes at hand. If the divisions weren't addressed, our nation would be headed toward war. When I assumed the presidency, I inherited a fractured nation on the brink of collapse. In 1850, the nation faced its greatest crisis yet. I had to make decisions that would either tear us apart or keep us united. It was during this critical time that I pushed forward the Compromise of 1850, a piece of legislation that aimed to address the conflicting interests of the North and South. While the compromise was deeply controversial, it brought a temporary peace to a nation on the edge of war. As president, I was faced not only with the challenge of navigating the political landscape, but also with the internal conflict of knowing that my decisions would shape the lives of millions of people. That I knew that history wouldn't be kind or easy to me. My life has been full of controversy. Some praised my courage and decisiveness, while others criticized me for failing to fully resolve the issue of slavery. But such is the complexity of history. Today, I want to share my story with you, to help you understand the life of an often overlooked figure and the challenging era that defined my presidency. My name is Millard Fillmore, and I was born on January 7th, 1800, in a small rural town in New York. At the time, life in many American households was far from luxurious, and mine was no exception. My father, Jonathan Fillmore, was a poor farmer, working the land to make ends meet. We lived in a modest cabin, and the conditions were far from comfortable. We didn't have much, not even enough clothing or food to be certain of our next meal. Though our family didn't have much, my parents always placed a great emphasis on education. They believed that no matter our circumstances, knowledge was the key to changing our fate. My mother, Nancy Fillmore, was a wise and loving woman, and though she herself didn't have much formal schooling, she did everything she could to provide us with the best education she could manage. Even with few resources, she made sure we had the chance to read and learn, whether it was from the few books we owned or the stories she would tell us. Though we didn't have the means to afford a private tutor or expensive books, I still attended a small school in the nearby village of Schoharie. The school was humble, a single-room building with old, broken windows and desks that had seen better days. But the teachers were dedicated, and they taught us the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic. It was there that I first developed a love for learning. I remember that the school lacked many of the resources we might have hoped for, and books were scarce. I often found myself studying the few textbooks we had, and when the lessons were done, I would take to reading on my own. Over time, I discovered that I had a strong interest in law. I found myself reflecting on the concepts of fairness and justice, wondering how I might one day help to maintain order through the law. As I grew older, my parents' hope for my education only deepened. They knew the power of learning, and though they couldn't afford expensive schooling, they supported me in every way they could. I also recognized that if I wanted to make something of myself, education was the key. So, I dedicated myself to learning, often studying by the dim light of an oil lamp at night after working the fields with my father during the day. By the time I was 16, I had begun to read and understand some complex legal texts. I dreamed of becoming a lawyer, though that seemed far beyond my reach. Still, I didn't let go of the idea. With no money to pay for formal legal education, I turned to a local lawyer for guidance. I became an apprentice to a man named Harold Good, a newly practicing attorney in the area. He was willing to take me on, despite the fact that I had little to offer in terms of payment. I spent long hours in his office, learning the law the best I could. Those years as an apprentice were difficult, but they were formative. We didn't have the resources many others had, and the law books were scarce. But through sheer determination and a passion for the craft, I gradually gained a solid understanding of legal principles. There was something deeply satisfying about the law. It wasn't just a set of rules. It was a means of bringing fairness and justice to society. Each case had the potential to shape someone's future, and the idea that I could be a part of that was what drove me forward. I spent years honing my legal skills, building a reputation for myself in the small town where I worked. Slowly but surely, I began to gain clients and win cases. But during all this time, I never forgot the bigger picture. I realized that I might have more to offer than just being a small-town lawyer. I believed I could make a difference on a larger stage, if only I had the opportunity. Despite my legal work, I didn't immediately set my sights on a political career. My focus remained on practicing law and helping those who couldn't afford it. But even then, as I grew and learned, I knew that my journey wouldn't be limited to the courthouse. I was a young man who had risen from humble beginnings, and my ambition was to do more, both for myself and for the country. After I had spent several years practicing law, I began to realize that my ambitions extended beyond just helping individuals in legal matters. There was a growing sense in me that the challenges facing our nation were far larger than any one courtroom. I started to see how laws affected the lives of many people and how, at a broader level, political leadership could help shape the course of history. My first real taste of politics came when I was elected to the New York State Assembly in 1829. It was a modest position, but one that marked the beginning of my political journey. I was not yet a well-known figure, but my experience in law and my growing sense of responsibility toward society made me eager to represent the people of my district. During my time in the Assembly, I gained valuable experience, and I also began to better understand the complex political landscape of New York. I was deeply interested in the issues of the day: economic policies, national expansion, and the growing debates over slavery. These issues weren't just abstract ideas to me. They were real and pressing concerns that needed practical solutions. In those early years, I wasn't one to simply follow the crowd. I often took stances that went against the grain, and my independent thinking started to gain attention. I took a strong stand in favor of internal improvements, such as the construction of railroads and canals, which I believed were necessary for New York to remain competitive in the growing economy. At the time, these were contentious issues, but I felt they were vital to the state's future. As I grew more comfortable in the political arena, I also began to make connections with other politicians who shared my values. One of the most significant turning points came when I joined the Whig Party. The Whigs, at that time, were focused on modernizing the country and expanding the economy, which aligned closely with my own views. I wasn't necessarily drawn to the party for ideological reasons alone, but rather because I believed they represented a platform that was both pragmatic and progressive. It was with the Whigs that I would begin to rise through the political ranks. In 1832, I was nominated as a candidate for the United States House of Representatives. I had never run for national office before, but I felt that my background in law, combined with my time in the New York Assembly, had given me the experience I needed to serve in Congress. I ran on a platform of economic growth, infrastructure development, and a firm belief in the rule of law. To my surprise, I won the election and became a member of the 23rd Congress. My time in the House was a true awakening. I was exposed to national politics on a scale that was far greater than I had ever imagined. It was in Washington that I began to understand just how divided the nation was on key issues, especially regarding slavery and states' rights. These divisions would define much of my career moving forward. My first years in Congress were marked by hard work and a desire to get things done. I worked across party lines when necessary, always striving to find common ground. But I also found myself grappling with some of the most difficult moral questions of my time, particularly the issue of slavery. I was not an abolitionist, but I also believed that slavery was a moral wrong that needed to be dealt with carefully and gradually. As I settled into my role in the House, I knew that my political career was just beginning. I had much to learn, but I was determined to serve the people of my country to the best of my ability. Little did I know that in the years to come, my political journey would take an unexpected turn that would lead me to the highest office in the land. In 1848, my political journey took an unexpected turn. After years of serving in the House and establishing myself as a member of the Whig Party, I was nominated as the vice presidential candidate under Zachary Taylor, the Whig nominee for president. It was a bit of a surprise to me. I had never sought the position of vice president, and I had certainly never anticipated that I would be chosen for it. However, politics is often a matter of timing, and I was nominated because I was seen as a moderate, someone who could help unite different factions within the Whig Party. That year, Taylor and I won the election, and I became Vice President of the United States. At first, the job seemed relatively quiet. The Vice President, after all, didn't hold much sway over the direction of policy. I spent much of my time presiding over the Senate, casting the occasional tie-breaking vote, and preparing myself for whatever might come next. But little did I know that fate had something much larger in store for me. Just 16 months into his presidency, President Zachary Taylor passed away suddenly from illness, and I was thrust into the office of the president. It was a sobering moment for me. I had never prepared myself to become president. I had always assumed my political journey would be that of a vice president, perhaps a stepping stone to greater things down the road. But now, in the wake of Taylor's death, I was the one who had to lead the country through one of its most difficult and divisive times. Slavery was the central issue of the day. The nation was splitting along regional lines, with the North and South at odds over the issue of whether slavery should be allowed to expand into the territories acquired from Mexico. The question was simple in one sense. Would slavery be permitted to spread westward, or would the new territories remain free? But in practice, the question was anything but simple. It touched upon issues of morality, economics, and power. It was a question that would define my presidency. From the very beginning, I knew that I would have to make difficult decisions, and I would have to do so in the face of fierce opposition. The nation was deeply divided, and it was clear that if we didn't find a way to compromise, we risked tearing ourselves apart. My first major decision as president was to support the Compromise of 1850, a package of 5 laws designed to address the issue of slavery and preserve the Union. The Compromise of 1850 was controversial from the start. It included the Fugitive Slave Act, which required citizens to help capture runaway slaves, and it admitted California as a free state while leaving the issue of slavery to be decided by popular sovereignty in the remaining territories. It was a delicate balance, and many people, both in the North and the South, were unhappy with some part of it. I knew that the compromise would anger many, but I believed it was necessary to preserve the Union. The nation was on the brink of disunion, and if we didn't act, we might have been faced with civil war. I didn't believe that the Fugitive Slave Act was a perfect law, nor did I agree with all the provisions of the compromise. But I felt that the greatest good for the greatest number was to pass it and try to maintain peace for a while longer. My decision to push through the Compromise of 1850 was not without personal cost. It divided my party, and it cost me the support of many Northern Whigs. The Fugitive Slave Act in particular sparked intense opposition in the North, and many of my former allies turned against me. But I stood by my decision, knowing that sometimes leadership required making tough, unpopular choices. While my support for the compromise helped avert immediate disaster, it also planted the seeds for future conflict. The issues surrounding slavery would not disappear, and in many ways, they would only grow more contentious in the years to come. But at that moment, I believed I had done what was necessary to keep the Union intact. As I continued my presidency, the weight of leadership grew heavier with each passing day. The Compromise of 1850, which I had worked so hard to pass, did bring a temporary relief to the nation, but the peace it brought was fragile. In many ways, I had hoped the compromise would settle the growing debate over slavery, but I knew deep down that the underlying issues had not been resolved. They had simply been deferred. The issue of slavery was as contentious as ever, and tensions between the North and South were only becoming more pronounced. One of the most difficult aspects of this time was the fierce criticism I faced from both sides of the political spectrum. Many in the North saw the Fugitive Slave Act as a betrayal, a law that forced them to uphold the institution of slavery even in free states. For them, the law was a moral outrage, and I became the face of a policy that was deeply unpopular in the North. On the other hand, Southern leaders were discontented with the compromise because they felt it did not go far enough in securing the expansion of slavery into new territories. I found myself in the difficult position of trying to appease both sides, knowing that neither would be fully satisfied. Despite the tensions, I held firm in my belief that the compromise was the best option for the country at that time. My primary concern was keeping the Union intact. The thought of a civil war was constantly on my mind, and I knew that if we could not find a way to reconcile these issues, the nation would be torn apart. My political party, the Whigs, was deeply divided over the compromise and my support for it. I had always considered myself a moderate, someone who could bridge the divide between the North and South. But the divisions in the Whig Party were growing, and many of the party's northern members abandoned me, disillusioned by my stance on slavery. On the other hand, Southern Whigs also grew increasingly dissatisfied with my failure to advocate for the expansion of slavery. The once unified party began to splinter, and I could see the writing on the wall. By 1852, it was clear to me that the Whigs were no longer the cohesive force they once were. The party's internal strife over slavery and my increasingly unpopular positions made it difficult to continue leading effectively. I had already decided not to seek a second term, not because I didn't care about the nation, but because I believed it was time for someone else to step in. The country needed fresh leadership to address the growing sectional divide, and I felt that I could no longer provide the unifying force the nation so desperately needed. As I watched the political landscape shift and the Whig Party falter, I realized that my time as president was nearing its end. The 1852 election was fast approaching, and I knew that my chances for re-election were slim. The Whigs nominated Winfield Scott as their candidate, and although I supported him, it was clear that the party's days were numbered. The Democratic Party, under Franklin Pierce, was gaining ground, and sectionalism within the country was becoming more entrenched. The issue of slavery was no longer just a political matter. It was an issue that threatened the very fabric of the nation. My decision to step aside from the 1852 election was not an easy one. I had worked tirelessly for my country and for my party, but I knew that a new direction was needed. I believed the best thing I could do for the country was to allow someone else to take up the mantle of leadership and attempt to steer the nation through its growing crisis. Though my time as president was coming to a close, the impact of my decisions, especially regarding the compromise of 1850, would be felt for many years to come. As I left the White House, I did so with a sense of pride in the work I had done, but also with the knowledge that the issues I had hoped to settle were far from resolved. The question of slavery and the divisions it had caused would only grow more intense in the years to come, eventually leading to the Civil War. After leaving the White House in 1853, I found myself in a quieter, more reflective period of my life. No longer in the public eye, I returned to New York, where I spent my time reflecting on the decisions I had made and the course my country was taking. Although I had left politics behind, the country's troubles were far from over. The divisions between the North and South were deepening, and I knew that what I had faced in office was only a precursor to the storm that was about to break. I attempted to return to private life, focusing on my business ventures and occasionally engaging in public affairs when called upon. I even considered pursuing another political office, but it was clear that my time had passed. The Whig Party had collapsed, and the political landscape had shifted dramatically. I had always been a moderate, a man of compromise, but it seemed that the country was now yearning for more decisive leadership. In 1856, I was approached by the Know Nothing Party, a nativist and anti-immigrant group, who asked me to run for president once again. I reluctantly accepted their nomination, despite having reservations about their platform. The country was in turmoil, and I felt that I could not simply stand by while the nation was being torn apart. However, my candidacy was unsuccessful, and I was once again reminded of the divisions that had overtaken the country. As the years passed, I watched as the issue of slavery escalated toward its inevitable confrontation. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 and the subsequent secession of the Southern states marked the culmination of the divisions that had been building for decades. I had always believed that the nation could find a way to avoid war, but by the time the Civil War broke out, it was clear that the issue of slavery had become irreconcilable. The Union was breaking apart, and my heart ached for what was to come. Looking back on my presidency, I often wondered if I had done enough. I had worked hard to keep the Union intact, even if it meant making decisions that were unpopular at the time. The Compromise of 1850, for all its flaws, was an attempt to find middle ground, to prevent the country from falling into civil war. But in hindsight, I realized that the conflict between North and South could not be contained forever. My decision to support the compromise, while pragmatic, had been a deeply difficult one. It was a political maneuver designed to preserve peace, but it did not resolve the moral issues that slavery raised. I feared that the country was too divided for any real resolution to be found through political means alone. The war that followed would prove my fears to be correct. In my later years, I retreated from public life, content to let history judge my actions. I spent time with my family and lived a relatively quiet life, but the turmoil of my presidency and the challenges of leading the country during such a critical period never left my mind. I died on March 8, 1874, at the age of 74, knowing that the nation I had served was forever changed. The Union had survived the Civil War, but at great cost. I had tried my best to keep it together, but I knew that the course of American history was beyond the control of any single man. My presidency, while not marked by great triumphs, had been a time of difficult choices, of compromise and sacrifice, and of trying to navigate the precarious balance between two fiercely divided regions. Though I did not achieve the lasting greatness of some of my predecessors, I take solace in knowing that I did what I believed was right at the time. I may not have been able to prevent the Civil War, but I did everything I could to delay it and preserve the Union for as long as possible. History, as always, will be the final judge of my legacy.